Maurice, it's a pleasure to have you, and I can hear that Australian accent kicking in
Yeah.
more and more as you speak. I love that.
Thank you. Yes, Australian through and through. Although actually, my husband and I come and go between Australia and New Zealand, so there's probably a little bit of Kiwi in there as well.
Oh, really? That's really fascinating. Well,
Yeah.
we have a big map in my classroom, and my colleague has traveled all over the world. He's been to China and every sort of country you could think of, right? And so we're talking earlier, we're just looking at the map, and we're like, oh, we'd love to go there. I'd love to go there, and just talking about like different places. And we actually pointed to New Zealand, and both said we'd love to go there. So
It's
beautiful
beautiful.
place.
Amazing. And actually, a lot of people think that they're very similar countries, but they're quite different. Australia is so vast and it's such a big place. And Aotearoa, New Zealand, is tiny, and there's so much you can do in a small amount of area in New Zealand. So it's good if you're not, if you're coming from the UK or from the US, it's a great place to be. You can get a lot done, and beautiful nature, and incredible.
So what's the connection to New Zealand then? Did you grow up there and move to Australia, or?
No, I married a Kiwi. So, so I was living my life in Sydney, and I was in my mid to late 20s, and I just happened to meet this incredible guy who was from New Zealand, and we started going to New Zealand every year or so. And he had originally grown up in Wellington, and back in the day, Wellington was a very quiet place, not much going on. You couldn't get a good coffee. Everything was closed on the weekends, and he was pretty much of the opinion that he was never going back. But we started going back to visit his family, and it was amazing seeing New Zealand change over time. And every time we went back, the coffee was better. There were more, people doing more interesting things. Culture in Wellington is incredible. So lots of great art, lots of beautiful bars and restaurants. So it just kept getting better and better. So in 2019, we actually moved over, and we were living there for 5 years. So we're back in Australia now, but we certainly enjoy the best of both worlds. And it's very nice having a Kiwi for a husband and feeling that connection to that country as well.
What a great story. And I think, as you said there, it's great that you got both New Zealand and Australia that you can travel back and forth from, and you got the experiences, and, you can travel back and see family or see where you grew
Exactly.
up, etc.
Yeah.
So I think that's fascinating. And every time you go back, you sort of learn more about yourself, and especially when you come away from something and then go back to it, I think it gives you a different
Absolutely.
context.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I grew up in Australia, and really didn't realize how lucky I was. It's such a beautiful country, but when you're in the middle of it, you don't appreciate it as much as you might. And then we'd been living in New Zealand for a couple of years, and I started, because I'm an artist and I work with, I'm an abstract painter, and I started working with these really deep, rusty reds and pinks. And it took me a moment to realize that that's actually very Australian. And I started producing these kind of very Australian colors that are quite, of the outback, these deep, earthy colors that are, very, it's not New Zealand at all, but I think it was me just exploring a fragment of my Australian identity that I really needed to step back from the country itself to be able to see and explore and appreciate. So yeah, it was beautiful. It was a surprise, but it was lovely.
I think what you say there is a couple of things that I've taken away from that. So it's about exploring and finding who you are, and then having that analytical skills to look at how you've adapted and changed, perhaps when you hadn't realized, and what you've taken away from the environments around you, right? And how that's
Yes.
impacted your work, how that influenced the way that you were approaching things, but also looking at identity, which I think is an important aspect of that as well, which comes into play.
I agree. And I think one of the nice things about creativity is that it can be quite serendipitous. So for me, a lot of the things that happen in the studio is all about play. So it's not about intentionally arriving anywhere. It's just about seeing what happens. And I think this is a lovely part of the journey of self-discovery, and also of reflection and learning as well, is that you don't always have to know where you're going. For me, this has been one of my big kind of creative themes, is just that the ability to be in the moment, to play, and then as you say, look and see what's coming up and be able to reflect on it. So the fact that I was just, mucking around in the studio, when I'm painting, I don't have any plan of what I'm going to be making. I just literally turn up and I start with one color, and I'm actually someone that has, about 100 different canvases on the go at any one time. So I'm going between a lot of different canvases very quickly. So I don't have a lot of the time to rationally engage. I'm just, kind of plugged into my subconscious and, doing whatever intuitively comes to me. But it does give you a lovely opportunity to then step back and see what's happened, see what's come out, see what's appearing, and then have a think about what the connections are. Isn't it interesting that these colours are coming up after, all this time of not being in Australia? Isn't it interesting that they were very nourishing to me at the time as well. They were really a sense of feeling that connection, that anchoring into part of my identity that I really hadn't appreciated. So yeah, it was a lovely opportunity to kind of see that kind of connection to country in a very different way than I ever had before. And I think sometimes you do have to be in a different place to be able to do that reflection.
I love the way that you put that together, because there might be a different thought process behind how we're each approaching this, right? But I'm trying to make that connection between psychology, between creative minds, and how we're finding that, and also trying to link in the colors to perhaps another aspect of our life. So on my classroom wall, right, I have four letters, BHAG. So they stand for big, hairy, audacious goals, right?
Fantastic.
And that's a theory from like the 1980s. And part of that is linking that to personality colors. And I talk to each of the students when they come in, and I'm like, oh, which personality are you? Which color do you think you are today? Which one do you think you are in the majority of your life? So it's about trying to go, right, we're not always fixed to this one particular personality, but there's a color there, right? And it's about finding other colors and the contrast. And sometimes it's about sitting in between like orange and blue, and then blue and green, green and red, and so on. And sometimes students get conflicted because, like, sir, I don't really know where my identity is. And I'm like, your identity is truly who you are, but these colors will just represent the mood that you're in. And sometimes we just flicker between them. And that can be the same with art, I suppose, as well, because your mood can dictate colors and creativity and make changes to the way that you sway. And hence why you got 100 canvases on the go, because your mind is fluent in the cross everything that you're doing, right?
Yeah, and I love the way that you're using color as a way to engage with how students are feeling. I think that is one of the best uses of color that you can have as a conversational starting point. How are you feeling? What color are you sensing into today? And I think colors are very intuitive. So we all respond to different colors at different times in our day, in our lives. And I think colors do an incredible amount for us. They enhance our mood, they can comfort us, they can inspire us, they can energize us. I think color is hugely influential in our lives. So I love that you're having that conversation with students. That's fantastic. I
And I
wish
really
more people did that.
And I completely agree, and I'm on that aspect where my classroom is. We try to get a balance where we're not overloading the students and overstimulating them, right? But we also want colour and try to inspire them and to give them things to look at and to uplift them as they come into the classroom environment.
Yeah.
And I'm very big on colours and how making students feel, and that's the same how I feel when I walk in. I want to feel energized. So here in the UK, we're featuring our best weather, which we've had for quite a few months now, right? So it's been really sunny, it's been really nice. So generally, the mood of people has been more uplifting, and they've been
Yeah.
more opening and welcome and relaxed. So it does really have that impact upon mood and how people react and how they reflect and how they move around things as well.
Yeah, agree. And it can be a nice way to explore. So you may not necessarily really understand why you're connecting or why you're drawn to a color at any one time. So even that can be a really nice journey of inquiry for someone. So, if they happen to be going through a green phase, it's a great thing to research. Well, why would that be? Why am I seeking out green? What does it do for me? How do I feel when I'm around it? What could that connection be? And it could be different for everyone, but it's a great way to explore and find different connections, to how we're feeling and what we're connecting to at any one time.
I love the way you put that, and especially that term journey of inquiry, right? And I've been fascinated by the number of terms which you've put into your bio and your profile and all these different things, right? Which really made me connect with and made me think, wow, this person is much more than just an artist, right? Their mind is all over the place, and that's a great thing, right? And that's what creates an artist, the true aspect of it, right? And you've taken the conversation in such a great way, especially considering the fact that it's 6 o'clock in the morning where you are, and I'm really
Yes.
impressed with that, and thankful, by the way. And it's incredible that we could sync up, and so I do appreciate that as a head start, right? Um,
Well, I mean, I have to tell you, it's the best time of the day. So, and there is a little bit of a story around this in the sense that I'm a working professional as well. So I consider myself to have a portfolio career, and I have to figure out how to make the best use of the day. And my creative zone is really very early in the morning. So I've made a practice of getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and doing 2 hours of my best creative work when everyone else is asleep. There's no sound. It's very quiet. And so 6 o'clock in the morning is a great time. I've already done my best work. So
yeah.
I love us having this conversation right now. It's great timing.
I really appreciate that, and I look at the way as well, right, where you say that, and there's just so many connections to the way that you're putting things, right? And when you talk about getting up and maximizing that time, and I like what you say about having a portfolio that is really creative, and the way that you really put that together again. But it's about looking at the time that works for you, because for me, I find myself being very creative later on in the night, having had a full day, digested a little bit, then I might hit a little slump, and then come back 9 to 10 and so on. I feel uplifted again, ready to go, and then that picks me up ready for the morning as I come back in, right? But it's about looking at what time works for you, and as you say there, 4 o'clock in the morning, even as an artist, that gives you a different contrast. When you look out the window, you see the dark colors, you see, the everything waking up, and then you get to see the light when that comes in, and the shift of seasons across that year. And then you look at the journey between 4 o'clock to 5 to 6 to 7. Then you might have a bit of inspiration at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Then you might go suddenly 6 o'clock, ping, another one. So I think you're having lots of creative bursts throughout the day, but starting really productive with a
Yeah.
focus as you wake up, right?
Yes. It's always worked for me really well, but everyone has a different, I think, cycle. And my husband's a complete night owl, so he used to be doing his best work at 2 o'clock in the morning. He's adapted a little bit now, so he's a bit more of a morning person, but not as much as me. But everyone is different, and I think it's really a matter of experimenting and seeing what works for you. So a lot of people have asked me about my practice and gone away and thought about it and tried it, and either it's worked for them or it absolutely hasn't worked for them, or they've experimented and adjusted. So I have a friend who's a writer, so I write as well, and she went away and tried my 4 a.m. start, and it didn't work for her. But what she did is she started getting up at 5 o'clock and doing 1 hour. So rather than me doing 2 hours at 4 a.m., she started a little bit later, did a little bit less, but she's been off and running and she's incredibly productive. I think she's published 8 books now, so it's absolutely worked for her. So there's lots of different ways to take an idea and experiment and see what works for you.
Yeah, I like the way that you piece that, because the whole point of you coming on, it fits into a series of the education series, right? And in the back of my mind, some people might be listening, going, "Well, what does sport have to do with an artist?" Right? And I'm like, there is so much to do with an artist, and I'm actually like really impressed that you're our first artist to come on the pod and to talk about this. And there is a big connection there between creative minds, which I think start to become, which we start to lack as we become. We've tried to fit ourselves into identity. We become fixated on systems, and that creativeness we start to lose, both in our identity and both in our personality, right? And the way that we approach sport, the way that we approach life, and we strip sport back, and we still look at that person. But I think it's about looking at what works for you, looking at how you experiment with life, and as you say there, what I wanted was to really look at where you're at now, how you've gotten there, right? Because on your profile, you're an author, you're an artist, you're a creative people leader, which I love that term, right? Once again, an educator, and another great term, right? A communications practitioner, right? So
Yes,
we know
it's a
that
lot.
you do all these amazing things, and we've had a great opening introduction, right? But when you were a young professional, a young person looking to start out your career, what was the first step you took?
Oh, that's a really good question. So the first step I took was actually a misstep, but it was very powerful and it really paved the way for everything. So I guess when I first went to study at university, I I had all of these dreams of being a writer when I was young, and I went to study journalism, and I didn't like it. It wasn't a great fit for me, and I really struggled with knowing what to do there. So, I ummed and ahed, and I wondered about whether I should stay. But actually, I decided to leave that degree. I walked out after 2 years, and my parents didn't speak to me for a year. I mean, not really, but they were very upset, And this is the thing, I think. It was probably my first step in taking ownership of my life, because I was going against the grain. I was doing things that people said, absolutely, that's a bad decision. And I think for me, part of my personal journey has been able to really evaluate what I want and then make a decision based on what's right for me, not for everyone else. So I stepped away from that course. I moved to Scotland. I had a year in Scotland where I actually studied sculptural metalwork. I learnt how to weld and make, metalwork installations, which was kind of crazy. But it was a big transition for me, because it was that first step in practicing being the author of my own life, and really that was what helped me to then move into. I went back and studied. I did a fine arts degree, which I completed, which was fantastic. But in the end, I did actually move back into writing, but it wasn't until I'd gone deeper into creativity that I circled back to writing. So I think that first step. It didn't turn out the way I had planned, but I think for lots of young people, the first step out of school is not what you think it's going to be. I think we also change a lot, over time. We're not the same person at 20 that we were at 15, and we have to be okay with adapting. And particularly now in the landscape that we're living in, the world changes so much, and we really have to be flexible. And I think taking ownership of our lives and being okay with experimenting and trying things and learning how to understand what's going to work for us, because we're the ones that live our lives. Everyone else gets to go and forget about us, but I think it's a good lesson in evaluating what's meaningful, what's going to make us feel fulfilled, and then figuring out how to go about it. And it's not necessarily easy, and we won't necessarily get everyone agreeing with us, but I found it very helpful. So that was my first step, and so that was a bit of a shift for me, but it worked well.
I'm glad that it worked well, and I'm glad that that shift ended up fulfilling what you wanted to do in your ambitions and what you're feeling, because sometimes you might feel, right, I have to get on this pathway and it's going to take me here, and sometimes you might have like a dream or aspiration in your mind that you really want to achieve, but you have a career, you've worked hard for it, you're still getting enjoyment out of it, but it perhaps isn't what you want, right? And sometimes when you read stories, you like, sometimes, an actor didn't enter the acting scene until they were like 40, 45 and so on, right? And I think that's, for me, every time I try to pitch into a student, it's like, okay, you might have a dream, it hasn't just worked out for you. You might have a career path where obviously your parents are directing you, schools directing you to like your plan B, which is going to become your plan A, and you want to set yourself up for life. And we want to make sure you leave with all these things. But it's also about not ruling out when your goal or aspiration might come later on in life, because you might find at 30, suddenly you've gone, right, I've had 10 years of this career, and bang, something else has entered my life, and I've got the opportunity to go off and do that. And suddenly my life is a complete different pathway.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a nice invitation to play with life. So I'm just one of those people that don't necessarily think you need to have all the answers all the time. So you just need enough information to take a step, I think. And with my writing, the reason that I didn't gel with that journalism degree was that I didn't really like the media landscape, and I've never liked really the news cycle and the news landscape in that regard. So even though I didn't quite understand what I was not loving at the time, it didn't mean that I couldn't go and find other ways of working in with writing and content and communication. So I've ended up working in communications a lot of my professional career, really, even though I didn't enjoy that first portion of study. So I think even though we may have an experience that doesn't quite work out the way we do, it doesn't mean that the whole picture is gone. It's just, we just need to find something that's more aligned with our skills, our values. And for me, I really needed to just be in more of a creative space. So being an artist actually helps me write, funnily enough. I have to be in a creative space to then translate things into words, funnily enough. It's not the way all writers write, but for example, the book that I've just published, which is my second novel, has an illustrated version where I've done 28 illustrations, which are my own paintings. And it's very uncommon to have a novel that's illustrated for adults. So, usually would see this in graphic novels or in children's books. But for me, that's part of my writing process, being able to tap into my intuitive creativity through painting first, and then the story unravels around that. So that's been me finding my own process. No one could tell me that was going to be the process that would work for me. I had to kind of go and explore and figure it out for myself.
But as you've explored there, like you said, that it might be graphic novels for adults and typically children, right? You don't tend to see those illustrations as a book, right, where they're put together. So not only have you had that intuition where you've had creativity, you've then develop something which is into a book format, and then you've looked at it for adults. So you've actually pieced a number of different concepts together as one and found perhaps a gap in the market, or a gap which exists because it isn't really a common theme. So why isn't there that a common theme where those books don't exist, right? Is it because that creativity is lacking? Is it because it's never been explored? Is it because you've started to think about that creative work and that portfolio and how you've interlinked all these different skills, so art allows you to become a writer, so therefore other people are not feeling inspired or motivated, and therefore that's why there is a very low intake of books, for example, in that format?
Yeah, so many good questions there, Luca. I think you've just asked 10 questions that, I could think about for ages. I will go away and reflect on some of those. But, I think there's practical reasons for it. Illustrated books are expensive. So my illustrated version is far more expensive than other copies of my non-illustrated version are. So it may not be for everyone. And I think, for me, part of my creative process has been about creating something that's truthful and meaningful for me. So an illustrated book is part of my creative expression that I find meaningful. I think that the story works better with the illustrations. The illustrations, painting has made me a better writer. And part of my creative goals with creating the book was to create something that was authentically me. So it wasn't to sell a million copies. It wasn't to become a bestseller. It was a creative project that allowed me to engage with my creativity, build a practice. So a creative practice, and the discipline around that creative practice is something that I really wanted to hone, and a big project like a book was the perfect vehicle for doing that. So I think it's important when we're doing these projects, and I think this translates into any kind of project, whether it's a creative project or another. Setting those goals at the beginning is important, and for me those goals were very personal, and they were about getting better at my craft and doing something that was unique and meaningful to me. And that's me putting myself out into the world in a way that I wanted to. So I didn't just want to do a book the way everyone else did it. And whether that's profitable, whether that will buy me a mansion, I highly doubt it, but it wasn't really the reason that I did it. And it's something that I can really say that I believe in, and I'm really happy to have done it. And that's an important part of the journey, I think.
And I think what you put there, right, because you can be very materialistic, right, if you were to aim for the mansion. And if you've got that mansion, then it would be as a result of all the hard work that I put in, creativity, your unique skill set, which you have combined and got there, right, which is amazing. And it's a side to the students where we try to look at meaning in life, and we try to get them away from looking at everything which is materialistic and go, well, look at the life that you could live and everything else which you think will come alongside it. So you want to go out and buy yourself those brand new shoes, you want to go out and buy those clothes, great, fantastic. We want you to do that, right? We want you to have the money, but we also want you to have a point where you might hit the deepest, darkest moments, or you might hit adversity, or something might happen which you never realized. But where is your meaning in life? Where's your resilience? Where are you going to come out through that will allow you to get back to the good times which you might experience before it, or the good times which you will like to come from that. So we try to take each student with their own blended approach. We try to make it, which one do we go for? Do we go for option A, about being materialistic? Do we go about meaning of life? And how can we link that background together and try to look at their aspirations, look at their motivations, but try to explore education, creative thinking, thinking outside the box, which is really meaningful for me, right? And if I were to, pick Jordan up, I was going to put her on the street now, and I said, right, you've got the day to yourself. You can go out and do whatever on the street. You've got a whole day. I'm going to put $100 in your pocket, right? And if you were to find that meaning in your day, right, regardless of whatever you went off and did when I put you in that street, where would you find meaning? What would you go and do beyond everything that you do, which is true to you, regardless of where you are?
If we just took the basic scenario of having $100 in a day, I would literally just go cafe hopping, because cafes are where I do a lot of my writing. So I sit, I get my coffee, and Sometimes it is about people watching and being present in the world, but sometimes it really is a little bit about just having time to sit and reflect and tune into myself as well. So a lot of my intuitive work comes just from having a pen and a paper and doodling and writing a few notes and reflecting on the day and my goal and where I'm at with my life. And so for me, having those moments where I don't have to be busy, I don't have to have a to-do list of 1,000 things. I've got time to just drift and dream and imagine. That's my perfect day. And for me, that's a lot of where I find meaning in life, just having time to think and just to be with myself, to be out in the world and to be a little bit free. So the idea of just being able to cafe hop is a little bit of freedom for me. And I like the idea of that we don't always have to be in the middle of 100 things and tied to 100 different people. I'm an introverted person. I like to do things by myself and individually, because I think that's how, as an artist, I kind of tap into my ideas. I live in a landscape of ideas, and so the more time I get to explore these ideas, the better. And that sounds like a good day to be doing that.
And I love the way that you put that together, where you have this landscape of ideas, right? And it's really good because you talk about reflection and you talk about taking time to drift, dream, and imagine, right? And I was listening to something yesterday which I was sharing with my sister, and my sister's very creative. She has her own business where she looks at designs, and she's very creative in that sort of world. And when I get to just watch her and the way that she operates,
Yeah.
we were and this is what I played the clip to her, and this clip came from a director of Nike who's retired now, right? But he was saying how he created marketing concepts and looked at shoes and designs and all this, right? And he spoke about having two parts of the brain, which is your red brain and your blue brain. So your red brain would be very creative, or your blue brain would be very creative, sorry, and would be putting, that dreams, those ideas, people who sort of drift off, right? And then your red brain would be the analytical side and data, stats, and putting that all together before going off and doing things. And that's where my color analogy sort of came in, because as I was listening to it, I was like, I actually am very creative in the times when I'm doing a bit of content for the podcast, or I'm doing stuff for
Yes.
football club in marketing and putting that together. And I love doing that side of things. But a lot of my job and what I do is also driven by data and stats and having systems and strategy behind all these things, right? So actually, yes, I am, say, majority of the time red, but I come onto the blue side as well. Whereas my sister would be very much blue, sometimes onto the red, right? Because
Yeah.
she's more creative and how she brings that together. And it's what you say there is, I'm a big fan of sitting back, drifting, dreaming what's there, and having that imagination of what's to come. Because sometimes I don't think we access our brains enough to enjoy the imagination which we have. And sometimes when I speak to some of my students, I'm like, just enjoy your imagination, just
Yes.
lose yourself in it. And that's the biggest thing which we have, as the biggest gift which we have, that we don't utilize enough.
I'm just writing it down because I love how you said that so much. And I think it's really true. I mean, I think our imagination gives us so much. And, even in the sporting world, that visualization is, a thing that people use to build into their program of achieving goals. It's an incredible skill that we have and an incredible capability that we have as humans to be able to see, to use our imagination to visualize, to feel into the future, to imagine. It's an incredible way of tapping into potential. And you're right, I don't think we use it enough, and I don't think we enjoy it enough. So it's there to be enjoyed and utilized. And sometimes I think and particularly I think this is what I find with adults, because the workshops that I run are for adults, and I find that adults are very hard on ourselves. So we have a lot of self-criticism. We're very quick to judge ourselves and each other, because I think we've lost that ability to play. And, no matter how old you are, play is incredibly, it's very nourishing, because it takes the pressure off. And taking the pressure off really is how we access our imagination. We can't access our imagination when we're stressed, when we're under deadline, when we're, driving to achieve, all of these things where we're very much in our logical brain. I think that we can far more easily tap into our imagination when we're more rested, relaxed, and we have that little bit of time to just allow ourselves to slow down. And that slowing down process is really key, I think, to being able to enjoy the imagination.
Absolutely spot on there, and that's what I completely agree with. Is just slowing down and taking that time where we can really take back some of our thoughts where we're not as stressed, where we have to, be aware of the deadlines which we have, but also try to enjoy life around that, enjoy some of our thoughts, and just slowing down, I think, is the most important thing. And that sort of relates earlier on into my day. So I finish work. I'm going to meet my dad by the garage because he's taking the car there, and I'm picking him up, taking him home. Right. So I'm sat at the top of the street just waiting for my dad to arrive. And it's a nice day. We got great weather. It's pretty calm and quiet around there. You can hear some of the birds every now and then, but it's just nice and calm, right? So I'm actually enjoying my 15, 20 minutes waiting. And but I see this car whiz up past me, and then he whizzes back down, right?
Yeah.
He's got the music blasting, and I'm like, just turn the music off, slow down, all right? I can see you pulling over up there to go into your house or whatever, but just take in the actual niceness and the calmness of the world around us, and just hear the things which, when we get to the end of life, everything is so final, and we think of all the things that we're so lucky to hear. The birds, the ability to wake up, we see the colors, we see the trees, we see all these things, and they're things that I love, right? And once it's final, you don't get to see any of that anymore, and you can be there and you can go, oh, I wish I just had that one day where I was back on the beach or back out in my favorite forest or doing that, but you don't. Whereas then you pass and everyone else lives and they continue to explore these amazing concepts of life, but yours is gone, final, done. And I don't think enough of us take in what's around us by that natural default.
No, I agree with you. And so I've got a couple of points there. So the first thing is that it doesn't take a lot of time in the day. So 10 minutes, 20 minutes, it's all you need. And I think if we're intentional about it, if we set that time, so it's in the schedule, so we don't have to worry that we're losing out on all the other things we want to get out of the day, but we're giving ourselves that time. And I think it is a little bit of a gift. We are allowing ourselves that we're giving ourselves permission to take that time to relax and enjoy life and to appreciate everything that we've got. And the other thing I was going to say is that what I found really helpful with some of my mindful creativity students is to encourage them to go on an awe walk. So awe is something that is actually very powerful, and it is very good for us to feel as humans. But we've kind of lost a little bit of that sense of awe in life. But to go on an awe walk means to just take 15 to 20 minutes and to literally go out into the world, turn your phone off, and be in nature or be on the street, whatever you can, and look around and just cultivate a sense of awe. Feel amazed that you're alive. Feel, stunned by the beauty of the trees and the air and whatever nature is going on. If you've got wind or if you've got rain or if you've got sun, just this sense of, it's amazing, actually. Everything that's in the world can be felt with a sense of awe. And again, it doesn't take a lot of time. You can do an awe walk around the block and only take 15 minutes, but it's a lovely way to feel connected and to feel a little bit more grounded and cultivate that sense of appreciation. It's very good. It's a nice little recipe for well-being, I think.
And the recipe of well-being, I really like, again, that term which you put that together. But I think once you actually start to piece this in terms of that terminology which you say there, so if I was to actually look at that and take that away into something for my students, I think I've actually learned something from you there and going, right, what's our recipe of well-being today? And I think sometimes we talk about recipes of success, but when we have a recipe of well-being, sometimes our students are stressed. And a big thing for us at the moment is we have 10 weeks left with our students, and part of those, they have a lot of exams before they leave. They're going off to college and maybe jobs, apprenticeship, and all these things. So they know the pressure is on for them at the moment. And the whole purpose of our briefing in school today, led by our head teacher, was let's try and take the pressure off and look at their well-being. And I like the way that she approached that, because we would be trying to cram in as much as possible with them. We would be trying to look at, trying to maximize this opportunity, which we're going to be doing at the same time. But that well-being has to come at the forefront, because the moment they're stressed is the moment that we're going to take so much away from the exams, the moment that they're going to be impacted, and so on. So I think that recipe of well-being is something that I'm really keen on there. But I also like the way that you have that all walk, and I suppose that's what I was alluding to, but you've put that in a much better way than I did, right? And that was just like, okay, I don't know how you would even phrase this, an awe observation, right? Where I was sat in awe of the world around us, and I'm observing what's there, and I'm enjoying it. And I don't think we do enough awe walking, where we just switch off, where we get into the world, we look what's around us, we have that feeling. And I'm very much someone built on feeling. I like to have something where I feel comfortable, what's something that I've taken away, and so on, and all these things. But I don't think we do enough awe walking. But I really like the way that you taught about that concept?
Good. I put together a little booklet on doing an awe walk and celebrating awe. So I will share that with you, and you might like to share that with your students, because it's very simple, it's free, doesn't take very long, and it's flexible, And that's the thing I like about the well-being recipe as well. It's really flexible, and well-being on any given day might be different for any student. And I think also allowing everyone to talk about, well, what is their own recipe, because everyone's recipe, again, will be different and meaningful for them. So it can be 100 different things. When we talk about a recipe for well-being, it might be more sleep, it might be time out, it might be a challenge, it might be a conversation, it might be, more socializing, less socializing. Everyone is different, and I think we can customize these things to every individual.
I think that's the important thing, is looking at customization and knowing what fits for each of us. Because as you said there about between you and your friend, you waking up before and her waking up at 6 or 5, sorry, and making that adjustment because she found out what worked for her compared to what worked for you, and she was able to find that creativity, or able to find that approach which really worked for her in her life and how she looked at each day. And I think when you talk about that, and that would be incredible to look at that or walk booklet, right? But you find what does work for you, and it's about what works for our students. So sometimes my students will come in, they'll be very heightened, and my job, right, a bit of background, I've jumped straight into it without giving any background, right? So I work in a behavior unit, don't like to call it a unit as such, and they try to do as much reflection with us as possible. So some of the students might get referred into us during the day, they might have displayed some negative behaviors, so then they'll come into us. It's down to us to sort of reprimand them, but also try to do some reflection with them at the same time. So I have to learn that each of my students will react a bit differently, they need a different approach. So sometimes when they come in, we might be straight on to one student because we know we need to be, and get them in a really structured place for them to respond effectively. Some we just need to give a bit of breathing space to, come round back to it, have that discussion, and then we'll get back into a frame of mind which is really going to work for the rest of the day, and try to look at that reflective piece. And it's about what works for each of them, because I could have a very standardized way of working with each of them. My next 10 students walk through a door, bang, 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 and I'm going to approach them in the same way. I'm not going to improve their behavior. I'm going to have these expectations that they take part in this reflective piece of work. They're not going to apply their best to it, and therefore the piece of work actually becomes a bit null and void in that respect, and we don't have that impact we're looking for. So I think when you have that personalized approach, I think it is really important.
Yeah, I like it. And I think it's good for people at all stages of life. So you've got students coming into you seeking that support and potentially adjustment. But I think every human being has that need to think about these things for themselves as well. So even if we have to take, I encourage everyone to take ownership of their own well-being and think about what works for them on any given day. And even if you have, a list of 100 different things you can look at to think about, maybe it's a day for doing some cooking. Maybe my restorative work today is about going to a sporting class or a workshop or a clinic, to help me get my head out of whatever it's in. And sometimes it's just about change. Sometimes it's about changing pace, doing something different. And sometimes it is about connection or taking time for ourselves. And again, that flexibility, I think, is something that we can be very creative with. Every person can create their own list of 100 different things that could work for them, and I think it's a good resource for everyone to have as well, because we can be our own best support system as well. Sometimes if we can't always get it from elsewhere, there will be times, I think, we all find that we need to have that self-reliance, and it's a good thing to have in our back pocket.
Yes, I think so. And I think having that self-reliance is a really important thing, because sometimes we always talk about, relying on others, or asking others to do the job for us. And sometimes it always comes back down to who is the best person to ask. Well, actually, I'm the best person to ask is me, or the best person to rely on me is first and foremost. And I think sometimes we put our ownness of the way that we expect responses or look at well-being on other people for them to sort of manage us before it comes back to ourselves. So when we have that self-reliance, it's actually looking at, well, actually, I need to deal with this in a situation, then I can explore it with other people. Or actually, what I'm doing now is relying on other people, but I need to take that self-reliance back a little bit and have that on me, because I know these people aren't always going to be around me. And I think that there becomes an interesting approach towards ourselves, finding ourselves, looking at our identity, what worked for us, and really taking that time to have that reflection, as you said, which really comes back into it. But something which has really been sitting on my mind for the last 10 minutes or so is I really like the way that you talk about us growing as adults, right? But where we have lost our ability of play. Now, I think that's absolutely true because sometimes we might, see a kid and we might be in a setting and they're playing with Lego and we want to sit down and go play with the Lego, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
they're playing in the sand with your kids on the beach and you might want to go play and do sand with them and build sandcastles. But we do lose that play. And there was a great quote by someone who worked with Kobe Bryant, right? And I actually took it from his book or podcast and I put it as a quote in my classroom. And it was talking about having this ability to go back to the sandbox, remembering when you were you, remembering when you were creative, and finding that inner you who had that exploration of um, curiosity, and we lose that once we come out of the sandbox. Once we start growing up, right, we lose that curiosity, which is the main concept behind a lot of our things. So if you weren't curious about your colors and going, oh right, why am I using those colors, perhaps you would not have explored more about Australia, right? That could have created a connection in your mind where you spent a day researching Australia or booked to go out to a part of Australia you've never been to and had the most amazing week journey, right? So I think once we find those connections mentally, then we have an ability to go and explore beyond what's in front of us, and then have that opportunity to explore the world around us as well as ourselves.
Yes, I agree. And it's interesting that we are so focused on encouraging play in children because we know how good it is. We know how important it is to their growth and to their development. And then we completely forget about ourselves as adults. We've got this idea that, it's no longer valid or necessary, but actually we're constantly evolving. We're constantly changing. And I think creative play helps us to come back to a space where we don't have to be so focused on outcomes. So I think as adults, we always feel like we have to show a finished thing, a deliverable. And I see this in students or people that come into my studio and they say, oh, I'm not really happy with this. It just didn't look like what I was hoping it would look like, because we have this expectation that, when we're learning something new, it'll happen immediately or very quickly. We'll start to paint and immediately we'll be brilliant at it. And we forget how joyful it can be just to throw paint around. And I think the more we can step back into that space of just not worrying about the end outcome, not worrying about the finished product, just being in the moment. It's very therapeutic, it's relaxing, and it does take us back to that place of play that we so enjoyed as a child. And I think if we're seeing kids playing with Lego and we want to jump in, we absolutely should. I think everyone would get, benefit from that. And I think we have to encourage each other to do that as well, and help others to realize that we are not judging them if they're doing something that's playful. I do think as the more and more adulting we do, the more we're worried about our reputations, how we look, how we'll be seen and perceived. And if we do something that's a little bit messy or unfinished, we might worry about how that looks. But it's very good for us. And a lot of creative people know that this is, you can do 100 different experiments and maybe one will be the one that works, but it'll be a really good piece of work. But you won't have got there if you haven't gone through all the play and mess. And when I started painting, I would have 100 canvases, and most of them would end up in the bin because I wasn't very good. But I didn't care. I just loved it, and I didn't matter to me how much ended up in the waste, because I was just enjoying the process. And still I'm quite slow at painting, but it's really about enjoying it and just being in the studio and having that time. It's blissful for me, and I encourage everyone to try and seek out what gives them that bliss. It may not be painting for everyone. There's lots of different creative ways to be creative. They're not all about art. We can be creative in lots of different ways, but it's lots of fun.
I think that's the fun, which is the element which we need to find, which really comes into it, right? And when we look at fun, we lose a lot of the concepts, because there's quite a lot of different things in there which I really took away. And I really liked, again, what you said about as adults, we have this belief that we have to provide a deliverable. And I was just having two different reflection points there. And my reflection point was the way that we change our mindsets as educators and coaches, but also the way that learners have that approach as well. So they might have this deliverable where they have a piece of work, and I can think of one student straight away, and she'll rip it up straight away because she doesn't like what she's putting on the page because of her own expectations. So she handed me her exercise book the other day. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the thinnest exercise book ever, right? And I'm like, why is it so thin? And she's like, because I just keep ripping pages out because I'm not happy. And I'm like, that's a really high expectation because the work you're producing now, I'm really, really pleased with this. I'm like, right, let's rip the pages out then, like you want, happy to accommodate, but let's not throw them away. Let's just put them in a Polly Pocket, right, and keep them because they're still great bits of work. So just having that process there of thinking, well, obviously she has a deliverable in her own mindset, so how could I support her as a student? But then also looking as a coach and an educator in terms of what we see on the pitch and what we see from our students. And I can reflect back to yesterday's game. We lost 2-1 in the semi-final, and I was working with another coach, and that coach, it's his team, and part of my job was to go and advise and support the coaching, which I'm doing. And I went there, and I had a very different perception to the things which he was. So I could see on the side he was getting very agitated, he was getting a bit upset, and in my head I was like, "Why are you getting so angry for? Yes, we're losing. Perhaps it's going against your expectation and what we've been working on in training, but losing your head right now isn't going to support the young players because they're starting to become wound up themselves. They stop playing, and that's where we lost the game because our mentality went out of the window. But if he just changed that expectation of deliverable in his mind, which we've been practicing, and going, well, actually, that was a really good run by one of our players there, or that was a great tackle, or that was great, then that's how I started to approach my mindset. And okay, there's a lot of things that I want to adjust and work on, and that's why we have training. It's a shame to have gone out the cup and all these things, but actually I've seen a lot of great things. I'm really pleased with that player, and yes, they might go home disappointed, and the level of that good because I want them to come back and feel determined, and I want them to reflect, but I also want them to go away and go, oh, you know what, Coach Lucas said I was really good at that today, and I lost, but you know what, I'm going to apply that next week, and I'm going to become a little bit better at what I do because I might just add in another element and then another element and another element, right? So I think what you said there about those deliverables, I think is so key. And I've taken that away from a coaching aspect, a learner aspect, a people aspect, a educator aspect. And I think that's so important for teachers listening, educators, coaches, players, and so on. And even just in ourselves. And my mum and dad went on holiday to Italy last year, and I know my mum came back. He said it took Michelangelo 10 years to paint the Vatican, right? And as you said, there as an artist, that got me thinking because, as you said, these canvases which you've been throwing away, and I'm like, initially when my mum told me, I was like, 10 years. 10 years, right? How does it take so long, right? Surely you just got up there, painted and whatever. But when you've put it like that and speaking to an artist who's experienced these yourself and has these thoughts, I think that's incredible when you actually think it's going to take such a big piece of time just to get this one little bit right because your mind is explored perhaps, or it's just tweaking it a little bit and it doesn't want to rush into it and all these different elements.
Yeah, look, I mean, I know that can sound daunting that there's a lot of, work behind the scenes before you arrive at something that you're happy with. But a tool that I've used with my students in the studio has been really helpful where we actually do a collaborative painting. So I have, 5 to 10 people in the studio and everyone will contribute to one piece. And of course, it's hard enough when you're doing your own piece to be happy with it. But once you've got 10 people, meddling and doing their bit, it can be a bit chaotic. But the exercise that we do is an observational exercise. So rather than getting everyone to talk about what they love and what they hate, which is very subjective and black and white, we actually get each person to share some observations. So observations being far more neutral and really just trying to take the emotion out of things. So, someone might say, I can see what you did there. I was observing how you were using the larger strokes to do these really gestural strokes. And I think that really impacted the sense of scale in the piece. Or someone might say, I was watching you do some little scribbling there. What were you thinking, and what were you looking to achieve with that kind of mark making? And asking questions and sharing those insights. So it's a far less emotional kind of debrief, I think, on a doing a piece of collective work. But it gives people a little bit of space and time before jumping into that really, high energy of I hate it, I love it, to really use their observational skills to look at what was going on, to ask really good questions to help their own learning, and to help others use their ability to talk about what they were doing and why. So, it's a nice space that's it gives people the chance to learn how to reflect on what they were doing, what they were seeing, and ask really good questions.
And I think that's such a great way where you've put that together, and really having those observations and those collaborations in terms of who you work with, so you can remove those emotions. It's not always black and white. You are able to get a number of responses which you can ask multiple questions, and it provides that space and time, which is before you get to the I hate, I love, and finding the why behind it. And just that key takeaway, I think, is so important. And I think that's a bit of collaboration, which something that I've been listening to is about where people look for affirmation, because I might say, oh, Jordan, well done, that's a really good piece of work, right? And I might have taught you for say 6 months, right? And over that period of time I've just been dropping in the comments, and then suddenly after 6 months you're not getting, say, the well done from me, or you've had a different teacher, and then suddenly you're looking for, oh, where's my well done? This teacher hasn't given me that well done, right? And I think there really is a balance between giving and you want someone to go looking for it as well at the same time, because I want my players to step up and go, right, I really have to work hard here. But I also want them to not always look for a bit of affirmation from me, because they're always seeking approval from someone else, right? And that's really stood out with me over something that I learned last week, and something which I'm focusing on more and more. And it's something which I want to do in training, and you've said it there, that observation, and it really enhances what I thought about last week, right? And it's about the players going, right, you tell me what you were happy with today. Instead of me going, right,
Yes.
well done, and this, you tell me what you did good today, or you tell me where we think we could have improved yesterday, or you tell me where we perhaps went wrong, and then we can start to collaborate on this and go, right, now today in training, the objectives are going to be all the things you've just said, and that's going to be your learning points.
Fantastic. I love the way that you've said that. And I think it's really healthy, because I think we can fall into this habit of being quite passive. We'll do something and then we wait to tell for other people to tell us how they feel about it. But I think it's very empowering for someone to say, well, what do you think about that? How do you think it can be better, or it could be different? Or what skills did you use? Or what skills could you have brought to the table next time that perhaps you didn't this time? So there's lots of different ways to look at improvement and development, and how things work. And good conversations, I think, are really healthy. And it's not always about, is it good or is it bad? Does it work or does it not? Because I think the more that we can learn from having an experience, and the more we can kind of have a discussion around different components of it, that all leads to that collective learning that we can share with each other, and that will help the growth in the long term.
I think that's what it comes down to, is that collective learning, again, which is because we're all coming together, and it's that perspective of those collaborations where multiple people within that group might have had different thoughts and reflections, especially as time has passed since that loss yesterday, or since we've done that piece of work. So how could we come together, and especially applied that rational mind to it as well, but also not having a system approach where, right, okay, we're looking at all the negatives from Sunday, where we're going to try and link that back, but also want you to be creative and enjoy training for what it is, because I don't want it always to be very, very highly focused or intense all the time, because you're still children. I want you to be in that sandbox. I want you to be creative, and there will be a time when you get older as adults and you're going to start to think differently and be in systems, and especially in sport we always talk about that. But as kids, I think we try to apply a system too much. We take away that creativity, and that's part of some of the big conversation which we've had here today, and something which I've really taken away. And there's so much which you've obviously talked about, and as someone, as a leader or a manager or a coach myself, and something which you talk about, right, is creative leadership, leading self and others, and you've touched upon that in terms of your collaborations, the habits of being passive, the different reflections that we have. But is there anything else which you think about in terms of that creative leadership which we haven't perhaps mentioned?
Look, I mean, with creative teams, I'm really in favour of, there's a quote, I think, that start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. I think, with people, I really think it's important to sit with your people, learn about them, understand them, and help them, develop in the way that they want to, and help them to have a voice in that development. So rather than imposing anything on our people, I think, and this kind of goes back to that collaborative conversation about what did you see, what did you observe, because that gives everyone in the room a voice. And I think giving people a voice is incredibly powerful as a leader, to be able to help your people use their voice and be able to articulate as much as they can, to be able to play a role and play an active role. So I think for me, developing creative people has been very much about helping them to be an active participant in their own development and really take ownership of their own development and growth by knowing themselves, knowing how to develop their own skill sets and how to collaborate with others. So I suppose it's quite a nurturing approach that I've taken, and a collaborative approach. But for me, that's also the joy of seeing people develop and being able to own their own journey. And I think that responsibility is also freedom, because we're not relying so much on other people to tell us that we've achieved or to tell us that we should go here or there. It's a very self-motivated and self-driven journey, which I think is very rewarding in the end. It's been rewarding for me as a creative person to be able to own my own journey, and that's what I hope for other people. And I suppose that's how I lead my teams as well.
Fantastic way of putting that, and I really, again, like the way that you talk about active participation in your own growth and development. And I think you have to really be committed to that, and something which you have to really take away. And a lot of today's conversation, which you've brought to the table, I think enables that active participation in terms of the way that you've even made me think, and the way that I've wanted to connect with your responses and formulate some of the learning concepts behind this, which I think we've done quite naturally in the way that we brought it together, right? But there's a couple of other terms which I really like, right? So you talked about vibrational language, and this was transcending human perception and offers a way of engaging with, and I really love this, otherworld consciousness. Now, when you talk about the otherworld consciousness, do you relate that to your all walk and that kind of concept, or is it something a little bit different?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's probably a little bit more on the esoteric side of my creative work, but it's also about my writing. So I write in what most people would term the science fiction genre. So a lot of my imaginative work is around how we can transcend our understanding of what communication means. And I suppose this is also because I work in communications. You know, I'm really interested in how we engage with each other. And one of the things I struggled with very early on in my career was that words just didn't seem to be satisfactory. I felt they were quite limited. And, you know, you can use words to lie or to lead people down the garden path and say something that is untrue. I was really looking for something that was far more honest. And I think art certainly helped me. I went into, you know, things like painting, which I think can tell a story, but in a very true way. But for me, vibration is about our personal resonance, how we resonate with each other. And for me, that's also about how we turn up to each other and engage in a really authentic way. And vibration is all about authenticity for me. So managing our own personal vibration is being very much our authentic selves and being aligned with our own personal goals and visions and belief systems. And for me, that then goes a step further to how we find ourselves in the universe that we're in. So I'm always interested in understanding how we can go beyond what we think of as the human capacity to commune and connect with the universe. So, and I think for me, again, I will go back to this idea that I think we can be quite limited by our logical mindset. So our logical mindset is rational. It's grounded in, you know, the logical structures of science and what you can prove with evidence. And for me, the work of the imagination is to really just let that logical mind go to sleep and then see what happens, see how our imagination can help us imagine something better and more holistic. Because for me, I really love the idea that there is more out there than we can sense. And I think it's about learning how to use our senses and believe that we've got more senses than we realize. So do I believe that we've got extra capacity to sense into a broader universe and other worlds, energies and dimensions? Absolutely. I mean, why wouldn't we? You know, I think it's, you know, what a shame it would be if we didn't have that ability to imagine and to feel into and to create this idea of us and our growth as humans and how we might evolve. So yes, I think communing with the universe is my landscape for thinking about these things and how we can evolve our human capacity for communication and connection, just so we can learn how to engage with animals and nature and non-human intelligence, all in a way that helps us evolve as humans. As I said, why wouldn't we want to do that?
I love the way that you again have that approach to thinking and have that approach to life, because I always try to look for out the box thinking and try to explore something that is beyond the system which is in front of me, or beyond our regular ways of working or living and all those sort of concepts, right? And when we try to look at that wider engagement or wider thinking, and we're looking at that personal vibration, and beyond the belief systems and going beyond that human capacity of thinking, that's something which I'm really, really key on, because again, that imagination and level of our mind, I think there's like something we use only like less than 5% of our brains,
Yes.
right? And when you think of the capacity of what our brains could actually offer us, I think that'd be incredible. So if the 5%, and we're not really exploring all of that 5%, and we're not thinking outside of the box in front of us, and I see that with a lot of young people and students that I work with, they actually want them to go beyond, and I want them to utilize their mind, which is so powerful, and something for them to take away, because I think there's so much which is beyond ourselves, which we haven't really realized. And when I listen to people talk about stoicism, and how even that concept of thinking and living exists and how it was founded, I think you have to be such a deep level thinker at that time to have found that. And then you've got the creative spaces which are perhaps on the opposite spectrum, and when some of these come into play, it's how that mind continues to explore and explore, which is the most incredible thing. Now, we've discussed so much. I know we penciled in an hour. I know I'm conscious of your day, Jordan, and I really want you to not take up too much of your time beyond the time that we agreed, right? But there's one last question I want to finish on. It's one of your questions. I think it'd be great to really hit on. And it was your question of what are the benefits of a portfolio career in 2025 and your secrets to success?
Oh, it's a big question as well to end on, but I love it. And I've loved all your questions. So thank you very much, Luca. It's been such an interesting, nourishing conversation. But a portfolio career for me means that I've been able to balance the things that put money in my bank account and the things that nourish my soul. So for me, I've always found, when I was very young, I was finding I was getting burnout because I was giving everything to one job. And I think that it's hard to get all of the things you want from a single part of your life. So I don't think we can get everything we want as a human being from one person, one job, one relationship, one situation. I think it's nice to have a really nice mix, and we get different things from different relationships and different environments. So I wanted to find a way that I could nourish myself in all of the different ways that I need. And for me, that's been a portfolio career, which means that I have a 9-to-5 job. I teach in the evenings. I have my studio practice. I write in the mornings. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm doing all of these things all the time, all at once, because it sounds a lot, but really I mix it up. So it's a way for me to engage with people in different ways, invite people into my own space and share some of the creative work that I'm doing, as well as being a service to my clients and to my company by bringing my skill set to the table. And what I love about this is that it keeps me active, it keeps me contemporary. So each part of my portfolio career is helping me to learn new things. And what I really like, it's kind of got a cyclical approach. So for example, my writing that I do, writing novels, really helps me in my communications work professionally, and my communications work professionally really helps me engage with students in the classroom and in my studio, because I really enjoy that engagement, and that's helpful for me as well. So I think every part of my portfolio career reinforces another part, and that's why it feels healthy. It feels like an ecosystem that's quite nourishing. I guess the one thing I have to be careful of is doing too much. So it really is a balancing thing. So we all want to be satisfied and nourished without being overwhelmed and overpressured. So, it's been a challenge of mine to really know myself, know how much is nourishing versus how much is just putting me in overwhelm and stress. But at the end of the day, it's made me really happy. And I recommend everyone try and find a balance of these things that sustain us and nourish us. And your other question about secrets of success, I think success is different to everyone. So it's really good for us to have a conversation with ourselves very regularly about what success means to us, because I think it changes all the time. You know, one year success might be about being out in front, you know, really achieving key goals and really showing up to what we've set our expectations on. And another year, our measure of success might be feeling rested and having a nice holiday and going traveling. So I think we should be the owner of our success goals and metrics and really reevaluate as often as we can.
Well, what a fantastic way to wrap up what has been a fantastic episode, honestly. And I think there's so many words at the end which I really will be taking away more. But the amount of different terms and little notes which I made right throughout, because I really took so much away. And I think that's the whole purpose. What I wanted the episode to be around was learning for everyone else. But the fact that I get to sit back and take many things away. And I've been so fascinated in what you had to say. And again, when I said at the start, how do you link art to sport, right? And someone thinking, well, you got an artist on a sport podcast, and that's the whole point. I want to be so much more than a sports podcast. I want to be an education podcast with sports, right? And some people might question the authenticity of behind some of that, but I think that's the unique stuff which I'm trying to set out to be a little bit different from, right? And I've really been taken back, and I really do appreciate you coming on, especially during your morning, which is your time of before everything else kicks in, right? But I do appreciate it, and I know you've got a whole day ahead of you, whereas the day is starting to wind down a little bit here in the UK. But it's been fascinating to talk to you, Jordan. I've had such a great time. And just before you go, very quickly, right? I have a friend who's out in Rockingham, Western Australia. How far away is that from you in reality?
About 5 hours by plane.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah,
That's
Australia's a
incredible.
big place.
Yes, it's massive. I was just curious. It was something which I was going to ask you at the start.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for your time, and it's been amazing to meet you.
No, thank you, Luca. I've just had the best time. I think your students are incredibly lucky. I wish you all the best. I'll be listening to this podcast moving forward. I've learned a lot, and thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. I hope you have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Luca.
No worries. Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye. You too.
But yeah, we try to be that group that can help be there for the players as a three, because I think you mentioned earlier, you want to have different characters in the changing room. You want to have different personalities. You don't want the same kind of people, because you're not going to be able to move forward. If you've got 10 people and they all agree the same things, you're going to get to a point in time where actually you're going to become unstuck. You need that one person to actually be like, nah, I don't agree with that. Or actually, we should try this. And I think that's why the huddle works, is we're all quite different as human beings. And I think you need 3 different people in there, because some players will naturally gravitate towards me and my personality, but equally some might go to the other 2, and that's absolutely fine.